Hi everyone, my name is Andy Cantrell and I have Chapter 10, which is using teams and organizations. You'll find the link to the PowerPoint presentation just below. What the chapter started off with is a good explanation of the difference between teams versus groups, which are two terms that we tend to use interchangeably. And a team is a group that's organized specifically to work together. They're specifically working towards and committed to a common goal, and they are self-directed, they're self-managed, where groups are two or more people that may just interact with one another, influence one another. They probably report back to a manager or a supervisor that's in the traditional hierarchy. If I look at a school setting, we have our English department, social studies department, and those are larger groups that are based on the curricular area. However, then each department is broken down into different teams. We call them teacher-based teams that are focused on specific courses that those teachers teach. So I teach British literature. There are three of us that teach that, and we meet weekly to discuss what we're doing in class, come up with common assessments, develop the curriculum, develop activities that we're using in the classroom. As you can see in the visual that I have there, you can see a difference between the team, where each of the group members has their own role that they play, and they all come together and add to the team working towards that common goal, where and it's self-directed, self-managed, where the group situation is that they're reporting back to someone and maybe not interacting all that much with one another. The chapter also then goes on and talks about costs and benefits of implementing teams. And the first thing it talks about is enhanced performance. And this is where, like, our teacher-based teams, our British literature team is really important, because what we work for and focus on is making what we're doing in the classroom the most beneficial for our students so that they can reach their highest levels of achievement possible. And so that's what the textbook talks about for enhanced performance, is that we see increased productivity, improved quality, improved customer service, waste is avoided, errors are reduced. And then it talks about reduced costs, and this is where we see lower turnover, lower absenteeism. There's fewer injuries, especially in like manufacturing settings, reduced scrap in manufacturing settings. There's fewer errors, and ultimately fewer workers' comp claims filed, which overall saves the company money. Other organizational benefits are increased innovation, increased creativity. Again, in our teacher-based teams, that is really what we're focusing on, is how can we reach our students in the best way, coming up with innovative lesson plans and activities for them to be doing in class. It also leads to greater flexibility. It eliminates some waste by eliminating redundancy within the hierarchy, the typical hierarchy that we see within organizations. And ultimately, employees feel more valued in team-based settings. Employee benefits are that they feel a sense of self-control. They can identify with their work. There's more self-worth, self-fulfillment. Ultimately, they have a greater quality of life, work life, and stress is lowered. And of course, that's really important within the workplace. Some of the costs of teams are that managers feel insecure about their role because they're shifting from being the leaders and managing the groups to being more facilitators, coordinators, and that role change tends to make them feel insecure. Sometimes specific employees feel that their jobs are in jeopardy because maybe a very specific technical type of position is just kind of absorbed within a group, and so that makes some people feel uncomfortable. Ultimately, it's a slow process to develop a team-based organization. The novel, or the textbook, talks about how it will take, just for the first phase that we're going to talk about in just a little bit, is going to take months just to do that. And it can take 2 to 5 years to fully implement teams within the organization. And as a result, because there are a lot of growing pains that occur, many organizations just prematurely abandon teams before giving them a full chance and implementing them completely. There are different types of groups. The first type or different types of teams. The first team is a quality circle, and this is pretty much a permanent team that's a group of people that work together to find solutions and recommend solutions in the workplace. They can investigate any different variety of quality problems. They do not replace the work group or make decisions about how work is done. They just provide recommendation to those work groups. Work teams, these are teams that do or make things. These are the teachers. This is my 12 college prep British literature team, in that we are the ones that are in teaching that class every day. These are permanent teams. They're the ones that are completing the daily work, and these are the people, the teams that become completely self-managing over time. Then there are problem-solving teams that are there to address just a specific problem. They make recommendations for others to implement. Again, they're not the work team. They're just making recommendations of how we can solve a problem that's come up. And it will have members from various different functions within the organization. Management teams are obviously managers, and they come from different areas, and basically they work as coordinators in organizing the work teams. They concentrate on getting the most overall impact for the company as a whole as they can possibly get from their teams. They're there as coaching counselors, guiding the teams to continue to grow and become self-managing, and making decisions by themselves within the group. And then they also coordinate the work between different teams and making sure that that's all flowing the way it should. And then finally, there's product development teams. These are teams that work to create new designs, products, services to satisfy customer needs and demands. And usually what happens is once that product or that service is developed and implemented, that team is disbanded. And then the last type of team is the virtual team. And my wife actually works on one of these virtual teams. She's a recruiter for a company, and she recruits people all across the country, and all of her coworkers are spread across the country. And so they really utilize technology, teleconferencing, computers, instant messaging, email to communicate back and forth with one another. And rarely are they ever in the same office, maybe just once or twice a year. And what's interesting about virtual teams is that depending on what the circumstances are, the discussion that's taking place within the team, the members may kind of move in and out. So it's a little more fluid than some of the other types of teams. The next thing is that there are certain steps that have to be done to implement teams. And the first is that there has to be leadership. And the organization has to establish who the leaders are going to be for implementing this change. They also have to develop a steering committee that's going to help look at all of the different aspects of the organization. They're going to conduct a feasibility study, and ultimately they're going to make the decision on whether the switch to team-based organization actually occurs or not. And then finally, there are 5 steps to preparing for that implementation. The first is that they have to have a clear mission. They have to be able to tell the organization as a whole why the change to teams has to occur for the benefit of the organization. And then they have to design what the different teams are going to look like. They have to plan out how the transfer of authority from top management is going to flow down to the different teams that are developed and implemented. And then they have to have a plan of step by step how the implementation process is going to occur. The textbook says that there are 5 phases to implementation, and the first is startup, and this is where they select the team members and they begin to train those team members. And it's important that the top levels of management send a clear message to the people that are going to be in the teams that they're fully committed to the teams and that they're not experimental. We've all been in organizations where the hottest, newest fad comes in, we try it for a while, and then it quickly fades away. They have to show that for this to be effective, that they are completely committed to it. And the second phase is reality and unrest. This is where the teams begin to kind of go through that growing pains and begin to struggle. They become frustrated. And it's important in this phase that the managers are visible, that they're there to provide encouragement to the teams. They can monitor the team's performance and provide any support that's needed. That's imperative in helping this team begin to come together. The third phase is leader-centered teams, and this is where members learn about self-direction, and this is where we begin to see a leader kind of begin to emerge from within the group, that everybody begins to focus on that one person as the leader. This is where managers begin to kind of just drift off to the sidelines and waiting in the wings for when they are needed. And this is where the development of a sense of identity for each of the team members occurs. Phase 4 is tightly formed teams. This is where everything's kind of gelled together and meshed, and the team has become tightly formed. But the concern here is that you can't allow the group to be so internally focused that then they're not keeping the lines of communication open with other groups. So that's where managers really need to make sure that those lines of communication between teams is left open. And then finally, phase 5 is self-managing teams. And this is where team members finally take responsibility for the team. They're developing all of the steps that they're taking. They are assuming all of the leadership roles and functions. And this is where the managers get to step in and just kind of provide that role as a counselor for the team. This is also where teams begin becoming more flexible, in that they are open to taking on new ideas for improvement. And they've become comfortable with what they do and who they are to try new things. Top management has to make sure that they are making the change to teams based solely upon the performance of the organization as a whole, in order for it to be the best decision to move to teams from the typical hierarchy structure. And they also have to communicate the reason for making the change to the rest of the organization. It can't be something that they just come in and say, hey, we're making this change. And finally, they have to provide support during the difficult periods of switching to teams. It's a long process. It can take 2 to 5 years ultimately for teams to be fully developed and working independently, being self-managed and self-directed in an organization. The book talks about also changing organizational rewards, and it talks about skill-based pay, which is just basically kind of how an education setting is that the more education that you have, the higher that you get paid on the pay scale. A teacher with a master's degree gets paid more than a teacher with a bachelor's degree. Gain sharing systems are where the company looks at the overall performance of the entire company and then rewards team members based on that performance. And team bonus plans are based on the performance-based goals that are set for the team. So if that team meets their performance goals, then they're rewarded for that. So I guess my question to you is, now that we've talked about teams and how to implement them, is what qualities do you believe make an effective team? We've all had to work, I'm sure, in teams of some sort or another. What are the qualities that make an effective team? Or maybe what are some examples of ineffective teams that you've been a member of? Lots of great things in this chapter. I've tried to cover it as thoroughly as I can in the time provided. I appreciate you listening. Thanks. Have a good night.